All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Tyler Hoeven. I'm from the Stellar Development Foundation. I'm an ecosystem engineer. And I'm joined here by my good friends, colleagues from the AHA Labs. If you'd like to introduce yourselves really quick.
Hi, I'm Chad Ostrowski, was at NEAR for a while before starting AHA Labs with Willem about a year ago.
Yeah, like you said, I'm Willem, and I've been working with WebAssembly in the space since like 2017.
Yeah, so we're decided to just take a minute out to talk about WebAssembly. We're kind of in this EVM versus WebAssembly. We've got Rust and all these different languages up against Solidity, and just wanted to take a minute to maybe have a discussion, talk about that for a minute. These guys have been working with Rust and WebAssembly. I'm an engineer. A lot of times I spend myself in the web, working with JavaScript. I've been learning Rust. But wanted to take a minute to kind of just have this open discussion about why do we have to? Is there an advantage? WebAssembly's been around for a while, but Solidity's also been around for a while. So maybe just take a minute to, from your own words, discuss the advantage or the significance of maybe having WebAssembly up over EVM.
Well, before we get into it, I'm curious in the audience, how many people use the EVM, use Solidity regularly? All right, so a quarter to a third of you? How many people have used WebAssembly or use a blockchain that uses WebAssembly? Very few of you. So maybe we should start by saying what WebAssembly is?
Great idea.
Willem, why don't you do that?
Yeah, so WebAssembly is a virtual machine like the EVM. It was originally designed to be a virtual machine you could run in your browser, so you could compile C code down to this bytecode and then run it in your browser. Since then, it's obviously grown outside the browser, so the web and WebAssembly is sort of a misnomer, but it's a very low-level virtual machine. So like compared to like the Java virtual machine, it's very bare bones, but that means that it's very close to machine-level code, and it can compile down or JIT really easily. So yeah, it's now been used for, with NEAR, I think was one of the first to, that's how I got involved in this space. So it lets you run more efficiently than, say, the EVM, because it doesn't have as high a level of abstraction as the EVM.
Can you maybe talk about that just a little bit more?
Sure, yeah, I guess I also want to say, like, WebAssembly is being used by NEAR, there's some blockchains in the Cosmos ecosystem use WebAssembly by using a plugin called WASM. By the way, what do you think? WASM? Let's see a show of hands for WASM versus WASM. I want to do that. WASM? Okay, WASM.
Oh, no.
All right, we got a few WASM.
Undecided.
Yes, Willem really likes WASM because WebAssembly sounds more like ASM. Anyway, COSM WASM doesn't sound as good, so COSM WASM. Stellar is making a new smart contract platform called Sorbonne that is hopefully launching its mainnet later this year that also uses WASM. I believe, I don't know, I know there are others. I'm not sure. I know Solana has like Rust support, but I don't know if it's using some subset of WebAssembly. Do you know?
No, it's like an eBFT, so it's like this secure native component type situation. So it's fast, but safe.
Nice. And your colleague Tomer, who was supposed to be doing this instead of you.
Correct.
Wrote a great blog post about why you chose WebAssembly. Y'all did a whole audit of different blockchain technologies and decided on WebAssembly. I would imagine that NEAR did a similar thing back when they were picking which technology to use for their smart contract sandboxing, for their smart contract platform. So I guess maybe, Willem, you are nodding like you might know something about that. I'm curious if you want to say why you think WebAssembly is a good fit for smart contracts.
Well, I mean, it's like I said, more low level and runs more efficiently than the EVM would. In fact, on Near they have Aurora, which is basically the EVM as a smart contract on top of WebAssembly. And so yeah, it just shows to show that it's a flexible and ever improving technology compared to something more domain specific like the EVM.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting things to me, particularly when you're talking about looking at technology as a whole and not isolating blockchain out by itself. You have this opportunity with WebAssembly to grab a hold of innovators and engineers, companies that don't care at all about blockchain. You're able to kind of borrow from their innovation to pull it into a blockchain-specific space. So WebAssembly isn't only used for blockchain, it's used for all kinds of different things. And because it can compile from so many different languages, anybody that's building out languages, you can pull those in, and those engineers are immediately able to just jump in and start writing smart contracts, which is really cool and really powerful. When we're in a space though, like if you look at that small subset of tech that is blockchain, it's like 95, 99% EVM. So is that a problem? Like when you pick the less popular choice, is that going to be a problem long term? Like who actually wins here? Is it EVM, even though it may be more difficult to make it efficient and it is kind of domain specific? Kind of what are our thoughts there on picking a less popular but maybe technology as a whole more popular?
When we were talking about this yesterday, we were discussing this and came up with the idea that right now the blockchain space, the blockchain ecosystem at large, is maybe where the web was at in the mid-90s, right? And we're still all figuring it out. There's no like MVC Ruby on Rails framework for building dApps yet. Everyone's still figuring out the basic building blocks that we need to make stuff work. So I guess a way of framing your question is like, maybe the EVM has some flaws, and we could talk more about those flaws too. We didn't really say like why, other than it's more domain specific. We didn't say any other like drawbacks of the EVM. So maybe it's flawed, but it's already so popular. Maybe it's like JavaScript, right? JavaScript, it had its flaws. It still beat out all the other programming languages for a long time. And maybe like now with WebAssembly and browsers, we can finally see other languages start competing with JavaScript. But it was super dominant for a very long time. Is the EVM already there? Have we already passed the JavaScript moment where it's so popular that it doesn't make sense to use something else? But if we think that we're sort of in the mid-90s, if that's correct, if that's a useful metaphor, and we're all still figuring it out, then the EVM could be like Java, right? And like other things became much more popular than Java by the early aughts, certainly by the mid-aughts. So that's kind of my take on this. The EVM, Solidity are in wide use within the blockchain ecosystem, but the blockchain ecosystem as a fraction of web development, the web development ecosystem is still tiny, right? So as more people come in, as more apps start incorporating some blockchain elements, will they use the EVM? Will they need to, or will there be better alternatives? Will they even use Ethereum, right? To me, that's still an open question.
Yeah, and I think when you're making that choice of starting out at some L1 from scratch, yeah, I mean, it's very attractive to use the EVM because of all the tooling and the ecosystem and developers. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But there are other promising projects that are trying to, say, compile Solidity down to WebAssembly, so then you can have the best of both of those situations. But yeah, no, I think long term, the investment that big companies like Google and Fastly and Shopify are putting into improving WebAssembly will make the long-term investment better.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, like when you use the comparison of languages in the 90s up against blockchain, like your users didn't have to pay. based on whether or not you chose a certain language. But if you choose the wrong language now, or you choose kind of the wrong engine behind the scenes, it's actually going to cost your users. Your growth mechanics long-term could be deeply affected in a way that, okay, if I choose Java or Flash or JavaScript or Python, like, I'll make it work, and my users won't have to actually make transaction costs for that. It's a little bit different now, and I think we need to think a little bit more deeply about like what's the value of being a maxi on EVM or like picking one of these languages. We need to be like keeping in mind who are our users, what are their costs, what do they get, what's the actual effect for adoption, for people kind of being onboarded into this, using it behind the scenes. Are their actual costs now? It's more affected than it would have been choosing languages, at least in my estimation. Well, we need to think pretty deeply about the like long-term effects. What's going to be the business costs of making these technical decisions? Because it's not exactly the same. These aren't just languages. They have actual financial implications further down the road.
Do you think that the EVM ends up costing more on average for users than WebAssembly?
I think so. But it's more a question of what's the rate of innovation, right? So if it costs too much and that begins to affect your bottom line, the engineers will make efforts to make it cheaper, to bring it down. But who has more engineers? The internet, like the web at large, Rust engineers, WebAssembly engineers, people who aren't kind of in this subset of blockchain, or just blockchain engineers, right? EVM engineers. So maybe it's a question of does the EVM kind of step outside of blockchain? Does Solidity as a language step outside of blockchain and get like wide main usage adoption outside of just this particular use case? That would kind of be I could see it happen on both sides, but it seems to me the safer bet is pick what the internet is using, pick what the industry, the tech industry at large is using.
Yeah, and like, you know, right now you can use any language that compiles the WebAssembly, and you know they're adding new proposals to it that will allow you to have garbage collection, which will let you have components, so you can have components that are compiled in a different language, be able to at runtime link with your library or your application. And so I think eventually we'll see, hopefully it'll be a dApp, but the package manager of all package managers will let you, pick a package and it'll have the types for your language, and you won't need to know the implementation details of that. And that I think that's going to be really powerful in bringing in people from outside of Web3 who, maybe would struggle with Solidity in these languages that are in even Rust, right? So the sort of democratization and allowing people to take any of their know-how and bring it to WebAssembly.
If we were to kind of maybe remove all of the competition, put just blockchain in general as a solution, is something that we believe is useful to the world, however we choose to implement it. I mean, that's a question we can definitely ask. What would kind of be your recommendation to developers, engineers, people kind of looking out at I like blockchain and I'm interested in using it? What should they be looking at? What should they be measuring in the technology that they're choosing? What's like a good mental model to approach the technology or the problem space?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry.
Like, again, if you look, you're trying to I want to use blockchain for something, you're going to get loads and loads and loads of the SEO from Ethereum, from Solidity. And so is that the default choice? Is that the right choice to make? Is there articles? Are there alternatives? If you are looking at WebAssembly, I don't want to make the assumption the WebAssembly is the right choice, but how do you approach kind of that problem space for yourself as you're looking at, I believe this can solve problems in the world and I want to use it for that purpose? Kind of how do you approach that problem space, that mental model of making choices on technology?
Yeah, I think a useful metaphor for me is kind of the EVM might be like React, where there's a huge number of developers, a huge community around it, contributing, packages that you can use, and there's a lot of tooling for it because of all of the people, all of the energy behind it. But maybe React is not the best choice for the web anymore, especially for the mobile web, right? So like, what's kind of upcoming, what's next? If I were trying to make a business right now and I were just trying to like make a product and get it in front of people, React still makes a lot of sense because of all of the energy and community behind it. So maybe the EVM does make sense for a lot of projects, right? But for people who want to be ahead of the curve and who have the energy and the expertise to navigate and explore the other options, then I think things that I would be looking at is ease of building it long term, right? And I think WebAssembly definitely excels there, where there's support for other languages and support for more types, right? So it's easier to build robust programs with things like Rust that compile to WebAssembly versus Solidity on the EVM. I would also be looking at things like cost of transactions on that blockchain. How does storage work on that blockchain? I feel like there are other things I'm not thinking of right now. Willem, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, going back to that 90s metaphor, it's as if there is this polished technology that you can choose that has all the standards already and an agreed upon way of deploying contracts and upgrading contracts, whereas on newer chains that are having to sort of invent it from scratch, those might not exist. So, you have to sort of do more work yourself, and it might be risky in the short term because there might become this new standard and you don't adhere to it. And so it's going to have some friction with maintaining and upgrading your code. So, yeah, I think if you have that long-term vision, then I think WebAssembly is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, cool. I agree. I think, again, taking a look at the ecosystem out there, the options that are out there, and being willing to just look, do some research, do some reading, find tools that make sense, find chains that make sense for the use cases that you have. And some of us are like, we're just engineers and we want to play with stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that, but have a nice wide breadth of experience and knowledge. I think one of the things that excites me about WebAssembly and Rust is, regardless of where blockchain goes, I know Rust now, and there's plenty of companies that are implementing using Rust that I can take and go and use that knowledge anywhere else. Same thing with WebAssembly. I can use it on the web. I can also use it in back-end applications. I can begin to onboard engineers that know nothing about the language I know, but they know their language. They can compile down to WebAssembly, and I can begin to implement those technologies. WebAssembly is just an amazing, innovative language to kind of pull together engineers from all kinds of interests and use cases, applications, and kind of be able to borrow from them. It's quite interesting in that sense. So yeah, I think, again, WebAssembly, a phenomenal option to explore, to begin to think about, do some research on, play around with it. My recommendation is definitely Rust on top of that, but I know we've also got, Solidity. They've got compilers from Solidity down to WebAssembly as well. So the opportunity is quite fantastic. Looking forward to seeing where it goes. Kind of keep an open mind, give it a chance, and yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll see y'all.